Alright, hello and welcome. This is CT5. Welcome back to Making Better Moves. We're going to talk about approaching the enemy, as promised. This is by no means going to be comprehensive, but yeah, I'm going to talk about, okay, what happens when we approach the enemy and their most likely responses, and what those responses typically mean. As per usual, things depend a lot on the context, and we'll cover a few different contexts as well. And then hopefully that will give you a good base to, better think about these things in your own games. Alright, so we're going to keep it, starting off. What happens? Okay, here's the situation. It is the start of a new round. The opponent already has one victory square. We're not going to worry too much about that, but up here in the top left-hand corner, those are the cards in the Pumpkin Dwarf's hand. And then down here, that's our Dwarf Warrior, and this is our Human Priest. No one else really matters. Well, it sort of matters, but Priest might not even matter that much. Anyways, that's that. It's our turn, and we have decided to move our Dwarf Warrior. We are ready to go into our Dwarf Warrior. We've got those attacks, we want to use them, hopefully. So, we're going to move him here. Not here, because it's out of line of sight of our friends. Right, that's bad. Here stays in line of sight, so this is ideal. There is an argument for putting our dwarf here. And that reason is for use zone of control to make it harder for the enemy team to sneak around. Right, if we had placed our dwarf here, which we said was probably the best spot, the Pumpkin Dwarf does have the opportunity to swing around now. So if we are worried about that, then we would happily put our Dwarf Warrior in the middle, even though it's out of line of sight of our Priest. Anyways, let's plop the Dwarf here for now, and let's think about our opponent's most likely responses. We approached a Warrior on the victory square. And again, it's like early in the game, everyone's at full health and everything, okay? So, in general, the most likely thing that happens when we stand next to a warrior, they're gonna swing at us. They're gonna attack us. That it's like, most of the time that's what's gonna happen. Yeah. And hopefully before we moved in, we were expecting them to do that. So we should be prepared for that. But yeah, if they attack, that's pretty normal. So okay, so we go, say they attack us. Bloop. What does that mean for us? Okay, if they have attacked, that doesn't, since they attacked, that's a really normal response. We don't get any real insights onto what they have. Right, because they could be attacking for a number of reasons. Just to check if we have blocks, just because it's a normal thing and warriors want to do damage and play their attacks. Unclear. So us attacking is very reasonable as well, especially since in this case they attacked us. They now know that we don't have any blocks. They're going to want to attack, and we moved up to attack. We should attack. Obviously the cards in our hand will change, how we respond to their response. But okay, so that's attacking. Pretty straightforward. If they attack us, that's really normal. The other likely thing they'll do, probably the next most likely thing they'll do, is to move another one of their units, or in this case, or possibly do something with their other units. That's probably the next most likely thing after them attacking. And what do those mean? Well, it's unlikely they'll move the priest. They already have line of sight. They don't have a good reason to get next to us, to want to get closer, unless they have a stab, or that's as far as I can tell the only reason. Stab and or get out of line of sight of the elf wizard. That might be very hard, because even if the priest were to go, say, here, the elf wizard can still see that. So if they were to move the human priest, they probably want to go here, to pressure. our dwarf a little bit, but I don't see them moving their human priest. Okay, so they'll most likely then move their human warrior. And basically the same thing. They might actually be able to get out of line of sight if they hop over to here. And that's actually a pretty nice spot, especially if they have a stab. If they really want to get out of line of sight of our elf wizard, they'd hop over here. And that's still fine if we assume they have a nimble strike, which is in general a safe assumption to have. It's very safe to assume that an enemy warrior will have at least one step attack. And then they get a nimble strike here. But usually if they're moving another unit, well, they probably plan to do something with that unit, or they might want to set up for something else. Note in this example, both of the other units have can wear shields, and they're currently outside. Their pumpkin dwarf is outside of that 3 square range. So if we attack them, we don't see they have defender's block. Okay, actually this is them moving in response to our move. So if they move up with one of them, there's a pretty reasonable chance. It's reasonable to think that they might have defender's block, because as long as they move past this line, they're going to be within 3 spaces of the pumpkin dwarf, and the defender's block will be active. Okay. The least likely thing to happen for the enemy to do after we move up is for them to move their pumpkin warrior away, especially given the circumstances where they're on the victory square, and they're at full health. They're so early. There's no reason for them to move their unit away. If the pumpkin dwarf were at lower health, that'd be a reason to move it away. If the fighting were happening around, say, maybe it was something like this, instead we approach there, there's a better reason to move the dwarf away now, because, like compared to before, they weren't giving up the victory square. Here, if they move away, it might, give their friends better access, or maybe they can try and swing all the way around if they have a big move. Here, it's a bit more reasonable. It's a bit more reasonable, more likely that moving their unit away is an option. But it's almost certainly it's the rarest option, for sure. If they do move away, though, what they have in their hand will probably depend on where they move to. If they move all the way back, well, dwarves, they don't go anywhere. Oh boy. When does a dwarf warrior move away? Does that ever happen? Okay, as unlikely as it is, if the pumpkin dwarf does move back, probably the main thing they're hoping you do is to go even further in, right? Say they go like here. They want you to commit further, right? Because imagine, right, let's say we do something greedy, like nimble strike in here, if we had one. Well, hey, once again, we've done our job for our opponent. We've gone next to their warrior. Happy birthday to them. And similarly, even if we go here with like a vicious thrust or nimble strike, they could stab, they could step in, things can happen. So it's some combination of them wanting to sort of draw us further into their territory, and or their hand is very weak. I suspect it's probably the former. Again, it's just so weird to think of them moving away first thing without even passing the bare minimum to see what we're actually up to before moving away. That's crazy. And in your games, if your warriors are at full health, an enemy moves up to you, and your first instinct is to run away even if you're at full health, like, I don't care if your hand's awful or whatever, like, you should pass at least once or move someone else. Probably pass. See what they're up to. Because it's possible, right? Let's say this situation had happened over here. We did something like this, and right, let's say, well, yeah, let's keep it simple. Let's say our warrior moves up, and then Pumpkin Dwarf player's like, oh no, it's a war. I'm ashamed of all dwarves, and they move back. Okay, realistically they move there, but if they're extra afraid, you know, all right, let's put them there. No, right, it's entirely possible this dwarf was moved up just to get this one out of the way to make it more convenient for them to move up. I think I made a very similar example in my first video. Detailing exactly this kind of situation. Now look, Priest is happy. They got to move where they wanted to. So when an enemy just moves up to you, just straight up moves up to you, and you're at full health, just take a deep breath, calm down, slow down. It's amazing what a pass can do. Anyways, also in terms of an enemy moving their unit away, like if we move up to like a priest or wizard, they're way more likely to run away than enemy warrior is. Okay, so let's then we've covered them attacking. So we approach, we've covered them attacking, we've covered them moving away, doesn't happen in this situation. We've talked about them moving another one of their units, pretty normal. But what happens if they pass? Fourth option, what happens if they pass? That is by far the most interesting one and probably the most puzzling one if you're newer to the game. Because why, if you're a warrior, why the hell would you pass when an enemy did your job for you and walked up to you? Why would you not attack them? So remember earlier, if we assume that the most likely thing for them to do in this case is to attack, we should be prepared for that. And the best way to do that, the best way to like feel prepared for that, is to have a block, right? A very common thing people do, they move in first with their units that have blocks. Hope their opponent, you know, wastes a card by running into the block, and then they've sort of they've gained tempo, they've seized the initiative. They're likely the ones getting the first hit in. Like it swings the timing around, right? And so that's where, if you suspect the opponent has blocks, that's where passing comes in. And that's what they're doing. That's one of the reasons why the enemy would pass when we approach them. The other big thing, and so yeah, by passing like that, by not even moving another one of their units, by not moving any of their other units, they're remaining flexible. They're showing you they're not committing to anything. They're showing, hey, I've got plenty of options. I can handle what you've got. So they're getting information. In general, oftentimes when you're passing, you're just trying to get information, get a better feel of what your opponent's doing. That or trying to hopefully go the next round to get better cards. But so in this case, Pumpkin Dwarf passes. We approach, Pumpkin Dwarf passes. They pass because they think we have mostly blocks. It's likely they have blocks themselves. Right? If they're passing, they're also saying that they are comfortable taking a hit in case we do have an attack. So that could mean, so likely they'll have some combination of blocks and or armor. Yeah. Ta-da! And in terms of them, and yeah, they're waiting, especially in this position where they're on the victory squares, they're extra comfortable with passing. So they've passed. What do we do now? We suspect they have armor and or blocks. What to do now? A very reasonable thing. We could attack into it and see whether or not they do indeed have blocks and or armor. If they have armor, that is the ideal scenario because they're showing us a lot of cards that can't be used to really hurt us. If they have blocks, that's a lot more awkward because especially if it's like a parry, which is pretty likely since warriors and stuff. That obviously hurts. And we typically would want to avoid running into opponents' blocks. That said, if we plan on being very aggressive and we think we can sort of brute force the opponent down even through their blocks, that's a fine reason to attack. To even attack into a block if you suspect one. But make sure that your hand is strong, that you do indeed have a good follow-up to it. Right? It's a little bit more awkward. Like, this is obviously a tough position to be in because we're just behind positionally as well. What's awkward is that even if we do use a bunch of attacks, they can just move away at any time and make life hard and then have one of their other units hop onto the victory square. Unless we want our elf wizard to go on, which is possible depending on what they have. All right, so going back, we've approached, they've passed, what do? We could attack, we could move one of our other units, right? That's probably, so we could pass, that's another option. Probably not ideal since they're on the victory squares. That'd be a pretty reasonable thing to potentially do another time, especially if our hand's weak, which I briefly mentioned. So in this case, man, that's a tough place to be. Yeah, in this situation, attacking is probably the most reasonable thing to do. Passing is also very reasonable to do, and what's fun about passing is that both players don't have any idea what's going on with their wards. They're just like, thinky warriors? What is this? What is this madness? And a lot of fun there because it's like you feel that there's something going on and you don't know what, right? And both players are still just waiting for that right moment to do something. That's pretty fun. It's a very fun option. Now the most reasonable thing to do after attacking is moving another one of our other units to do something. In this case, our elf wizard can hopefully do something. They're already in line of sight. They're within 4 squares, etc. Priest? And so, man, this is, right? Here's another great reason for the pumpkin dwarf player to pass. If we, say, move our priest up to try and pressure them, and their dwarf still has a bunch of attacks, smack the squishy priest, and we're really sad. So that's something we have to be careful about as well. We have to move carefully. So this probably lends even more credence to attacking for now, just to try and see what they're up to and force their hand a little bit. Right, moving too much too early, you sort of commit to a position, and then you're kind of stuck, and then your opponent can freely do things, which is one huge advantage of getting on the victory squares. Aside from getting you closer to winning, it makes it easier for you to pass. You pass, you force your opponent to make uncomfortable plays, uncomfortable and potentially inefficient plays, and then you can take advantage of that in some way. Both from them being potentially inefficient as well as the information you've gotten from the way they're moving. Cool. All right, now here's a fun scenario, right? We approach, they pass. We attack into them, we run into a block. They pass again. Now what? That's extra freaky. That's super gutsy and freaky. And what does that mean? One, that is a likely thing that is a real scenario that happens. Because again, pumpkin dwarf team, they're happy to be on the victory squares. They're waiting for us to commit more before figuring out what to do. And So what they're doing, they're once again waiting for more information. They've seen that we have one attack. They might be checking to see, right? They've seen we've used one attack. They're checking to see if we have more attacks, or if indeed that was just kind of like a little diversion and the warrior's actually mostly just holding onto blocks. And again, they're at full health, they can afford to take the hit. It might also mean they have another block as well. And if we see that, their parry or whatever came from like blocking maze, well, okay, that's a lot of parries. Gotta slow down then. And maybe we need to start considering moving someone else. So it's gutsy, it's kind of rare, but it will happen. And again, when you have that positional advantage, you can do it. Given it's the start of the new era and both of them haven't moved, it's right. There is always the possibility that they're just trying to get a better hand, and that's possible. But it's get an extra star. But it's much more likely they're still just waiting for us. If you have a really bad feeling after the second pass, it's reasonable to pass as well, especially if you want to get a better hand of cards. But you gotta be careful. They are waiting. They are waiting. Some bonus examples that I'll toss out. So we talked about if one of these units move up within range, it's potentially setting up a defender's block. If you think that's the case, try and fish it out of the person. Try and target the person who you think has the defender's block, or whoever can make the least use of the extra card gotten from defender's block. That's something to keep an eye out for. And so, right, that's when you often see priests, throw purges, or even use like triple heal, targeting enemies, is to fish out those blocks or check if they have, blocks. It's nice. It's a good thing to do. It's a way to sneakily get information. If you see that they don't have blocks, they're probably more vulnerable to target, though still beware of parries, right? Like if defender's block triggers off of triple heal, well, triple heal is magic, parry only works against melee. Let's be careful of that. If a priest is comfortable standing next to a warrior, whether it be the priest moving up to the warrior or our warrior moving up to the priest, they're comfortable standing there, suspect cushioning armor is a very reasonable one to suspect, especially since Star God's Raiments, the cushioning armor bless drain item is very popular and for good reasons. They're all very good cards. Do keep cushioning armor in mind. And then somewhat related, remember earlier how I said typically a unit with blocks typically moves up first, and passing is a good way to check to see what that unit is really up to. So when they move a second unit up, that's probably a better unit to target. I will say that the other thing that passing does, right, we've established that when the opponent passes or when we pass, we're trying to get more information from the other player. And one of the tense bits it does is there's a tension between like committing either with the same unit, say we just keep using our attacks. Well, okay, if we do that, cool, we haven't moved anyone else, but the opponent has a ton of information on what our dwarf warrior has done, and they see only one card, they realize probably a very, very vulnerable target. Right? So the tension between, and there's a balancing act we have to do between sort of like committing between one unit or committing with like as a team, moving as a team. It's to avoid running into like a settled state where we've sort of done everything we can do with one character and leave us exposed in that way. And why moving another unit, while it might feel weird, may be problematic in its own way. By leaving cards, by having just more cards in hand, we're giving our opponent more things to think about, right? Right. A warrior with 1 card in hand versus a warrior with 3 cards in hand, very, very different. Right. Typically, we're going to be scared of a warrior with 3 cards in hand. Warrior with 1 card in hand, as long as we think we can take the hit, it's fine. If they've been sitting there for a while, that sort of confirms it might be a non-attack or a weak attack, or maybe a move. Leaving your opponent in the dark is useful as well. It's especially more useful if, obviously, if our dwarf warrior had some step attacks, it gives us more flexibility of where to go to, who to attack, right? But in terms of leaving our opponents in the dark, right? If we move up to them and they pass because they suspect that our warrior has a lot of blocks, and we move another unit afterwards, we're playing into their theory. We're letting them think they're right. We're giving them credence to their theory that, okay, our warrior does have blocks. So they might, in that case, if they keep working with that assumption in mind, then when we do attack, that can just throw everything off. They might make they might make a sort of greedy play, and then we can throw them all off when we finally attack or move or do something with that warrior that we've sort of neglected for so long. Because we've played into their expectations that they do have a block when maybe they don't. Right, because things depend so much, I'm throwing out options for you to keep in mind and for you to pick and choose as you see fit in your games. Because there's rarely a one-size-fits-all solution. There's actually a neat thing I heard. It was from someone talking about fighting games, totally different genre, but like cool things. And they said, the intermediate player is looking for that one thing that beats everything that always works. And that's just not how games work. A good game should not have the one thing that always works, because then what's the fucking point of playing that game, right? And players looking to improve are looking for different solutions. They're thinking about when will different things work and why. So that is a good thing to keep in mind. Quick review, 4 most likely things. When we approach a unit, they'll either attack back, they'll move the unit away, they'll pass, or they'll move an ally, a different enemy unit, to do something. And the likelihood of those 4 things will change on the situation, right? I touched upon how the HP total, if they're low on health, they're more likely to run away from our warrior. If they're a squishier target, they're more likely to run away. If they're not on the victory square, they're more likely to run away. Stuff like that. So keep that in mind when you play as well. But I think that's all I've got for today. Thanks for bearing with me. Future topic, identifying your path to victory, identifying your win condition, and how that will impact our plays. So look forward to that at some point. Let's say 2 weeks to give myself some buffer. All right, I'll see y'all then. Take care.